I'm Jeff LaFrenierre. I'm a PhD candidate in the Department of Geography, affiliated with the Glacier Environmental Change Research Group at the Byrd Polar Research Center. The Glacier Environmental Change Research Group is interested in the implications of glacier change for human and physical systems in mountain areas, particularly in the tropics, though not necessarily limited to just those regions. I am interested in the impact of glacier retreat on water resources in the Ecuadorian Andes, and specifically I am investigating that question on Ecuador's tallest mountain, a volcano called Volcan Chimborazo. The glaciers on that mountain are the headwaters of 4 different river systems which support irrigation and domestic water supplies for about 200,000 people. So my research looks at glacier retreat on the mountain, how much, how fast, where, what the contribution of glacier melt water is to overall watershed discharge, meaning how important are glaciers and the water that they generate to the overall water supply, and then also how people who rely on that water, particularly farmers, are adapting to changes in the hydrologic conditions surrounding the mountain. Glacier retreat on Chimborazo is very obvious, and the people who surround the mountain are very cognizant of how quickly both the ice and the seasonal snow line has changed over the last decade or so. I started going to Chimborazo and doing research there in the summer of 2009, and have generally made trips at least every 6 months, if not more frequently. And even within 6-month periods, it's clear that glaciers are retreating. Considering what certain glaciers looked like in 2009, the first time I visited them, to what they look like today, it's very striking how much retreat is going on. Areas that were either completely glacial ice or had just small amounts of bare rock surrounded by ice have completely opened up in less than 3 years. An area of debris-covered ice that I've worked on fairly extensively, I've seen areas where previously there was ice or small ice caves, and now the ice is completely gone, has created melt ponds that are meters deep, holes in the ice surface where there used to be relatively even ground. And it's very dramatic and interesting from a scientific standpoint, and discouraging from the standpoint of how rapid environmental change is happening in this location. Most of the people who live there are reliant either directly or indirectly on agriculture. And in that particular environment, you need to have 2 harvests per year in order to have economic sustainability at the household level. Without irrigation, it's hard to get that second harvest each year. And the glacier retreat is really seen as being tied to an overall drying of the local climate. And so people are looking up the mountain, seeing changes there, recognizing that the types of crops they used to grow are not able to be grown year-round, or that the quality of the harvest that they have been able to produce in years past is no longer common. And they're very concerned about the changes that they're seeing around them. And one of the things that is particularly interesting and not a little heartbreaking is that people there blame themselves for the problems they're seeing. They see that the drying climate, warming temperatures, retreating ice is because of their bad stewardship of the resources surrounding them. Whereas it's clear from glacier retreats near ubiquity in mountain regions around the world that this truly is a global problem. And the causes of glacier retreat on Chimborazo are tied directly into global climate change. And for people there to blame themselves for something that is really beyond their ability to control is something that I think is eye-opening to those of us who live in the Western developed world. Working in Ecuador is very interesting because the people there are extremely friendly. It's been very satisfying to have an opportunity to enter communities, ask them questions, understand how they live, and be welcomed so warmly. Definitely it's a challenge to work in a different culture with different expectations and mores. Working in a different language has been a challenge for me as well. I wish I could say I was fluent in Spanish after as much time as I've spent in Ecuador, but I'll continue to have room to improve. Working in the tropical Andes is also interesting because it's a pretty extreme environment. One of the things about glaciers is you can either find them at sea level if you're willing to go to the poles, or if you want to stay where the climate seems like it would be pleasant, you have to go to real high elevations. And on Chimborazo, which is a mountain that's about 20,700 feet, finding ice means climbing to above 15, nearing 16,000 feet at the lowest. So a lot of the work that I've done has been on a pretty remote mountain in very high elevation conditions in weather that's generally pretty bad. Debris-covered glaciers are an interesting challenge, and the lower parts of several of Chimborazo's glaciers are covered in debris or rock, boulder, sand. That makes it hard to see where ice is and where ice isn't. A lot of times we can monitor glacier change by using imagery taken from satellites or from airplanes. However, when glacier tongues are covered with rock that looks just like the surrounding rocky mountainsides, it becomes necessary to really get feet on the ground to try to see what's happening with the ice. Even that's not necessarily good enough. You can stand on a debris-covered glacier and have no idea there's ice underneath your feet. So one of the things that I've tried to do at Chimborazo is to use new technology to map at high levels of precision change to the ice that might be occurring underneath this debris cover. A laser scanner is something that produces a very precise map. In fact, the map that I'm creating of glacier surface on Chimborazo is about 10 centimeters resolution. And by doing 2 different scans through time, you can see at that resolution the kind of changes that might be happening underneath the ice surface. One of the things that I feel most proud about with my research is I believe it will help build local capacity for understanding the environmental changes that they're experiencing around Chimborazo. In the past, there hasn't really been any sort of monitoring network of stream discharge, which is essentially the amount of water that's flowing down the mountain, the amount of water that's in canals at certain periods of time, the weather conditions and how those are changing. And one of the outcomes of my research is not only hard information which will help them make fact-based decisions for better water management, but as a legacy of my research, I'm also leaving behind the instrumentation that I've installed, and I've transferred that to the ownership and management of the local government. And they will continue to be able to monitor changes in a way that they have not been able to in the past. So I hope that my research provides specific information about conditions as they exist now, but will also help local people understand their system going forward and the changes that might continue to occur in the years ahead. I think that there's a lot of value for the type of research I'm doing because it helps us understand how physical and social processes are intertwined. And as a model for environmental challenges that people are facing, not only in Ecuador, but also in the United States, right here in Ohio, as we deal with the challenges of climate change and how local communities have to respond to those changes, having a model of research that provides a demonstration of how we can marry physical science with social science to answer the questions that we need to answer, I hope will be very useful. Of all the things I'll take away from my time at Ohio State, the most valuable, I'm sure, will be the connections I've made with people here. Science is something that's done incrementally and on the backs of people who have done work alongside you or before you. And I've learned quite a bit about how networks of colleagues working together really is what's necessary to do the kind of research that provides value to society. And I know for the rest of my career, I'll be able to look back on my time here and reach out to my colleagues from my time here and know I'll have a network I can rely on to help me think about the type of research that I'm doing.